Maximize your yields while spreading out your workload with the earliest maturing winter cereal. Visit kws.com/CA to see how our hybrid rye varieties can work for you. High yields, high quality, high value for your farm. KWS, seeding the future since 1856.
It's time for RealAg Radio on Rural Radio Channel 147 on Sirius XM. RealAg Radio and RealAgriculture.com is your home for insight and analysis of the issues that are impacting your farm business. Let's get real and get connected with RealAg Radio.
Hi everyone, welcome to this edition of RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio Channel 147. It is Tuesday, July 16th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. Most Tuesdays, we're trying to be pretty consistent, but it is a busy time of year, and we have a lot to get through on today's show. When I hit record for this episode, I don't know why, but I feel like I have a lot on my mind. I have a lot to say, a lot to discuss, and a lot of that has to do with some great feedback from all of you, our audience. We really do appreciate when you reach out, even if it's you disagree with something or you want to hear more of something, or hey, we didn't give this particular topic a fair shake. We really appreciate that because honestly, we like to cover what we find interesting, what we think is important for our audience to hear and keep tabs on, even if it's maybe not the most exciting topic or policy or whatever the case may be. And we do our best. We try to cover as much news as we can and as many topics. But of course, you are the ones listening. You are the ones on the landscape. You've got that tractor time, or perhaps while you're fencing, whatever it might be, where there's something probably on your mind. And those are the things that we like to spend our time exploring, finding answers for you, having those discussions so that you can listen while you work. So you could be like my friends this week that sent me an email, lsmith@realagriculture.com. Send me your thoughts, questions, concerns, criticisms. We take it all. We did have one person that said, hey, I want more cattle, more livestock coverage. And amen to that. Let me tell you, we definitely try, but there's always room for more livestock coverage. And actually, that's a bit of inspiration for today's show. A few things on today's show that we should talk about. But one of the main ones is we are going to talk about predation of livestock by coyotes, bears, wolves, yes, ravens as well, and birds of prey. But we are going to cover it largely from a Saskatchewan focus, and there's a reason for that. And one of them is that our social media coordinator, Paige Holmquist, she is in Saskatchewan. She is also a cattle producer, and she brought to our team definitely a concern in her area where there seems to be an increase in predation of calves and cows. And it's a huge concern, obviously. So much goes in to finally getting a calf on the ground. To then have them predated on by a coyote or a wolf or a bear is absolutely devastating. And it brings up an important question as to, is predation on the rise? What are things that lead to it? And then what coverage there is potentially if that happens, and of course what you can do to avoid it. So we're going to explore some of that today, yes, from a Saskatchewan lens, but I highly recommend everyone, if you are a livestock producer, by province, there are different programs in each province. I'm quite familiar. I'm based in Ontario. I'm quite familiar with our predation program. I can talk a little bit about our experience with dealing with coyotes for the most part, although we did just last week have one of the solar sites that we manage. There was what we think, what the evaluator says, was likely a cougar attack that took out at least 3 animals. So that's scary, I'll be honest. But also, one of those things that we just have to manage for, and there are ways to do it. So I'm going to cover the predation side, but also just the wildlife numbers themselves. And this is one of the things that I think from a producer's perspective, we understand, but we don't always have all the data on as far as what the wildlife population dynamics are doing. So are coyote numbers on the rise? Are wolf populations in decline? Are bears moving into new areas? These are things we don't always have information on. And so we are going to talk about sort of that perspective as well. Now, don't worry, it's not all livestock today. We've also got, I'm going to grab a clip from last week's episode of The Agronomist to talk about spraying in challenging conditions. So I had Tom Wolf and Jason Deveau on the show, the Sprayer 101 dream team, if you will, and some really important discussions there. I know that we are perhaps in the thick of or coming just past the fungicide window, but there's still a lot of acres to be sprayed. Certainly here in Ontario, we've still got our tassels just emerging, so we're hitting prime time here in Ontario, and there's a lot to consider spraying in the heat. And so that's what we're going to talk about. I didn't realize, I mean, I sort of thought about the fact that if it's incredibly hot, I've thought about, increased crop injury, or perhaps, you might need to adjust certain things, but I never thought about the fact that small droplets at high temperature, and so we're talking even over 25 degrees, but small droplets, especially in the face of low relative humidity, they actually just evaporate before they hit anything. And that is a bit of a mind twist for me. I never really thought about that. Now, obviously, the hotter and drier it is, the more likely that is to happen. But there's a few ways to manage for it. Of course, you can have fewer of those small droplets. You can choose to spray in the morning or the evening when temperatures go down. Or if you've got high humidity, not as much as an issue. So Tom Wolf and Jason Deveau were on last week's show. We're going to talk to them. I'll grab a clip from that. And then at the end of the show, we've got tons of news that's happening as well. And so this week, we've got the show lineup is a bit all over the place because we've got events happening. I'd be remiss if I didn't say AIM. So Ag in Motion is happening this week in Saskatoon. We've got Bern Tobin and Amber Bell from our team are there. Sean Haney, your regular host, is also there. He's doing a few really cool events while he's there. So best of luck to them and to anyone who's at the show, who's listening. Stay cool, everybody. I'd love to know, actually, this is one of the things, we're going to put it up this week as our poll. I'd love to know what's your favorite thing about outdoor farm shows or field days. For me, it's the people. It's the meeting up with people from all over the place. And I'm very lucky because I get to travel and I have friends all over Canada. And when I get to go to these shows, I finally get to see people from that area or the people that go to that show. And so I think back to years ago for like Farm Tech, that was a huge show to get to see all my Alberta people. AIM, definitely one of those gatherings. Here in Ontario, we have the Canada's Outdoor Farm Show in September. It is just such a gathering of people, and it is so wonderful to catch up and to see everybody. Yeah, demos are cool. All the booths and all the field demos, etc., all the new varieties, all that. Yeah, cool. But it's the people that make this industry, and I love to see them all. So have a wonderful week, everyone at AIM. All right, without further ado, let's get to a break, and I will be back with a clip from The Agronomist with Jason Deveau and Tom Wolf right after this.
Talking right now to Exotic's Global Business Development Manager, Tom Trigano. Let's talk about what exactly does Envita do.
So what Envita can do, it can be applied with your herbicide, your fungicides. It gets inside the plant cells, and that's where it fixes nitrogen. So really, we're talking about an alternative form of nitrogen that can fix nitrogen into a usable form right inside the plant cells. You can either use it in furrow or it can be a foliar applied product.
What can farmers expect from Envita when they're using it?
Obviously, that depends on the crop you're growing and what your fertility rates are. The vast majority of the folks using it are comparing it at 100% of their fertility. So they're not changing their nitrogen down. Growers are going to use this that's going to provide them the best ROI. The vast majority of the time, we're looking at this as standard fertility rates. Sometimes you're going to lose some nitrogen. I expect Envita to show a stronger benefit than it typically does, simply because the applied nitrogen would have been lost.
If somebody wants more information on Envita, the website exotic.com, or of course, you can always talk to your local retailer to source the product.
The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com has everything you need to get your crop off to a great start and a strong finish. Whether you're growing chickpeas, faba beans, lentils, or peas, you'll get all the latest and best agronomic information at PulseSchool.com. A library of top-notch agronomy videos from industry experts available on demand at your fingertips. Visit the Pulse School, brought to you by BASF on RealAgriculture.com.
Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, channel 147, Sirius XM. It is Tuesday. It is Tuesdays with Lyndsey. I am Lyndsey Smith. And yes, every Monday, like last night, I host The Agronomist. Now, last night's show was a great one. We had Marla Reichman of Manitoba Ag and Peter Wheatbee Johnson, who of course you know and love from the show. And we talked about compaction. We talked about what causes it. Really great discussion on potentially fixing compaction and how that's largely temporary. And we also talked about some rescue treatments on fertility because of how compaction impacts nutrient availability. Now, we did have an issue in that it is the summer and it is storm season. And so we did, at the very tail end, we lost power. So our producer lost power, who was streaming, of course. And so if you were watching or listening and you missed out on the ending, we did have a really great discussion. Marla and Pete and I did actually redo the ending. Like, we continued to record locally so that file is actually complete, and that will be up on realagriculture.com/agronomists as well as on YouTube. And so if you want to catch the ending, please do. And of course, if you collect CEU credits for watching the program, you can also collect those. So head on over to that page and let us know you watched, and away you go. Now, I don't have a clip from last night's show. I might use one next week, maybe. But I did want to bring in last week's show, and that was with Jason Deveau and Tom Wolf talking about spraying in challenging conditions. So what are challenging conditions? We always think, I think, of like really windy, or perhaps threatening rain, or perhaps it's too cold. But there's also, of course, too hot. And for the bulk of the spraying season, certainly the fungicide season, but also the herbicide season, really, we may contend with incredibly hot temperatures, and very hot temps have an impact, yes, on how the plant, so your crop metabolizes the herbicide or fungicide or whatever product you're applying, but it also has an impact on the spray itself, so on the spray cloud, on the spray droplets. And that's the conversation, or part of the conversation, we had last week. And here's a clip from that with Tom Wolf and Jason Deveau. So how then does hot and dry conditions, how does that shape the decisions we need to make for the spray pass?
Yeah, I see it really as two things that we ought to consider. The first one is the life expectancy of a water droplet. Is it going to hit the target? And when it gets there, is there enough time for it to do its thing? And the second aspect is, if it does do its thing, has the plant been compromised by this hot and dry weather? And so I wanted to maybe just review that a little bit. And Jay, I think I've got a slide one that might show the familiar, I guess, delta T. So in this figure here, we have a depiction of delta T, which is also known as wet bulb depression. This is actually, I have to give credit to Australia. This concept originates in Australia because a lot of their summer spraying is done under hot and dry conditions, and the life of the droplet was so short that they weren't getting performance. So they basically said, if the delta T, which is the difference between the wet bulb and a dry bulb, an aspirated wet bulb and a dry bulb, in other words, the wet bulb is colder than the dry bulb because of the evaporation of water driven by this wet wick. If the wet bulb depression is greater than about 8 degrees Celsius, don't spray, because the droplets that are emitted by your sprayer may not reach the target before they evaporate. That was the situation. I went to Australia for the first time in 2006. At that time, the air induction tip had not yet really caught on that much, but they were still spraying with flat fan nozzles. They told me 30% of their spray volume was not making it to the target. It evaporated on the way when they were spraying under these summer conditions. So the delta T concept arose out of that. And if you look at it, it is actually fantastic. So what I've done here is I've got in this figure, if you look at the 30% RH line, which, we usually go by RH, right? We think our relative humidity is the way to do this. But if you look at the 30% RH line here, and let's take two different temperatures. Let's take a cool day, 15 degrees Celsius. So go across on the 30-degree RH on the left side, come in until you hit the third line, which is at 15 degrees Celsius, and you will see that you're in the yellow region, which is delta T between 6 and 8. And you are technically, according to the delta T, good to go. The evaporation pressure on that droplet is sufficiently low to go ahead. Now let's take exactly the same RH and go across to a 30-degree day. And we're now, well into the no spray, where the delta T is 12. And it's the same RH, but two completely different drying situations. That is why I love delta T. It measures the evaporation of the droplet. And let's go to the next slide, Jay, if we can. And we have some examples of just the speed of evaporation. So we have two curves here. We have a red line. The delta T is 7. It's acceptable. But look at how different it is from the delta T of 1.5. So time to evaporate in a log scale on the y-axis and droplet diameter. The large drops, this is seconds. The large drops will take, minutes to fully dry under either condition. But it's the small ones, under 200. They're drying 10 seconds or less. And is that sufficient time for the pesticide to land? Is that sufficient time for the pesticide to make proper contact and to move into the plant before it dries? And uptake and absorption is driven by a wet deposit. It's much more efficient when that deposit is wet. So that's the efficacy part, or the droplet life part. If we go to the next slide, we have an example that I actually got in watching a Charles Getty's podcast, and he made me aware of this Wu et al. Paper from 2018, where they did the efficacy of glyphosate on kochia, and they did it under two different temperature conditions, not humidity conditions. So they grew kochia in cool environments, that's the blue line, and then they also did it under a much warmer condition, that's the red line. And you can see the efficacy of glyphosate is much lower under the hot conditions. And so, like, for example, you got a GR50 of probably, less than 50 or 25 grams, whereas the GR50 of the hot and dry is, close to 200 grams. So very significant. And the last slide I want to show here is the reason that they took. And that's that they measured uptake and translocation. And in the uptake slide, the next slide, Jay, in the uptake slide here, they showed that very clearly the hot and dry, the red line here, significantly lower uptake on the y-axis over time compared to the conditions where the plant was grown under cool conditions. So that is now the physiological response. Yeah.
Okay. So hang on, my camera's being silly. I have a question. So this is spraying under these conditions, or the kochia grew under different conditions?
The kochia was grown under those different conditions. Yeah. Right. So the kochia has acclimatized itself to a hot and dry environment, much more difficult to kill. I suspect that will also affect how the product is taken up, whether it's, I can't say for sure anymore whether it was also sprayed under hot and dry, but it would typically be grown there, sprayed, and then returned to that environment after spraying. So the plant is saying, you know what, I don't like this weather. I'm not going to metabolize much. I'm not physiologically that active under the hot and dry. So that does matter. It is a herbicide example, Lyndsey. It may not be as relevant for fungicides, but I think it's a bit of a lesson.
When we're talking about reducing our drift, do I need something fancy, or are there some basic things I can do to reduce the spray drift risk?
Way to softball that right into me. Let's start with a new website that was developed by a number of organizations here in Ontario called bedriftaware.ca. Yes. There was a grape grower who unfortunately suffered some 2,4-D damage. And the misconception, of course, is that 2,4-D doesn't drift as badly as, say, some of our dicamba products. And while its volatility is indeed less, that doesn't mean it isn't subject to physical drift like any other herbicide. And any horticultural crop that catches a whiff of that, you're not going to like it. So he'd had enough, obviously, who would tolerate that. And it led to CropLife grain farmers of Ontario, a number of them, to come together and amass some literature they thought might be helpful for people. I mean, there's a lot of information about drift out there, and it can be a little intimidating. So bedriftaware.ca boils it down and breaks it down into questions. What causes drift? What can you do to stop drift? What if you suspect that you've been drifted on? Highly recommend people go check that out. Drift in general, you wanted to know how to stop drift. Do you need fancy equipment? You do not. You need situational awareness. I mentioned earlier, I've been doing a lot of these sprayer drive-alongs with operators, and while the buddy seat is an absolute spina bifida murder kidney puncher, that easy ride seat looks pretty smooth. You don't know how fast you're driving. You don't know what the wind has done. It's pretty easy to zone out. Occasionally looking around, seeing what's around the sprayer, seeing when conditions change is a cue for you to make changes to how you're using your equipment. That could be going to a larger droplet by something as simple as a pressure change. If you have PWM, it's even easier again. Slowing down, dropping your boom. Just recognizing even which end of the field you're on and what's downwind means taking an active role as an operator can pay huge dividends. You don't need to run out and buy a lot of fancy equipment. Now, having said that, get yourself nozzles that do air induction, please, bigger droplets. And if you get into a pinch, have another set on there with a higher rate so that when you do slow down, you can still, produce a larger droplet at the right rate. I think I said that right. I always get it backwards. You don't need to spend a ton of money here.
So Tom, I'll ask you, when we're talking about something to add to the tank to reduce drift, do we need, is that the first step, or is that like the third or fourth step to reducing drift?
Yeah, I always divide it into two parts. It's hardware and software, right? So hardware is always number one. Right nozzle, right boom height, right speed, right water volume, all those hardware elements. But you do find yourself in the field sometimes and you're looking back and you see something that you can't handle and you haven't got the opportunity to change the hardware. You've done all the things you can do. That's where software comes in. The classic example in Western Canada, or maybe in the East as well, is Liberty. Liberty atomizes finer through the same nozzle than many other products. It has that kind of a formulation. And that's where these low drift adjuvants have found their place. Interlock, Valid, LI700 in some cases, which are sort of an oily adjuvant that suppresses the formation of small droplets. So the nice thing about them is actually that they produce small, they reduce small droplets without generating large droplets, which is the way that low pressure and larger and coarser sprays, larger low drift nozzles might do it. So there's actually a very surgical approach to these adjuvants. Now, they're not as big a hammer as air induction nozzles, but I've seen evidence that they reduce driftable fines somewhere between 40% and 60%.
All right, we're going to pause there, take a quick break, and I'll be back with more RealAg Radio right after this.
Advanced canola trait technology is here. And it's soon to be the talk of the town. Optimum Glide delivers excellent yield potential and agronomic trait performance. Improved crop safety. Enhanced weed control. And a wider window of application. You're going to want to see this. Learn more at OptimumGlide.ca.
If you're involved in the agriculture industry, it's important to stay informed on all the latest issues affecting your business. At RealAgriculture.com, we offer fast, reliable news, information, and insights to help you keep on top of all of the latest in Canadian agriculture. Visit RealAgriculture.com and sign up for our free daily newsletter covering everything from news, agronomy, animal agriculture, and much more. Visit RealAgriculture.com/subscribe today.
I'm Lyndsey Smith from RealAgriculture.com. Join me Monday nights for The Agronomists, a 1-hour live and interactive show broadcast across YouTube, Facebook, and X. Monday nights at 8 p.m. Eastern, I host expert agronomists from all over the country to give you answers to some of the toughest agronomic questions. Join us live or catch the replay Tuesday morning. That's The Agronomists with me, Lyndsey Smith, Monday nights live at 8 p.m. Eastern. welcome back to RealAg Radio here on Rural Radio, Channel 147, Sirius XM. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and maximize your yields while spreading out the workload with the earliest maturing winter cereals from KWS Seeds. Visit kws.com/ca to see how hybrid rye varieties can work for you. High yields, high quality, high value for your farm. KWS, seeding the future since 1856. I am Lyndsey Smith with Real Agriculture, and joining me now, I'm very excited about this conversation, to be honest, is Travis Williams. He's the team lead wildlife allocation specialist with the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment. Welcome here, Travis.
Hi.
All right, so what does a team lead wildlife allocation specialist do in the province of Saskatchewan?
Yeah, so our section, the allocation section of the Fish and Wildlife branch, is responsible for developing regulation regarding wildlife in Saskatchewan. Also does the licensing for big game and game bird species. We're responsible for outfitting in the province, and we also do wildlife inventories. So that's like wildlife surveys and things like that for population assessments.
Excellent. Okay, so and that is why we are having this conversation today, or at least part of the reason, is that talking about the wildlife populations in Saskatchewan. Of course, we have, as you mentioned, we have fishing, we have hunting, and then we have just the overall inventory and keeping track of what animals live in the province, and then we have the areas where the human and the wildlife population perhaps run into friction. And in this case, we're talking about predation. When we think about, let's say, we'll focus on coyotes, wolves, and bear, what are the dynamics of those populations, let's say, in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I'd say for all three species, I think in general, we can say that the populations are stable. The different species live in different parts of the province, obviously, but by all accounts, all coyotes, wolves, and bears all appear to have stable populations in the province, and not anything that's increasing drastically or anything. That they do seem to be following historical trends.
Okay, and how does your department keep track of that? What does that look like year over year?
Yeah, so for game species such as black bear, they're monitored primarily through the Hunter-Harvest Survey, which is a mandatory requirement for all license holders, and that's indicating that there's a sustainable, stable populations throughout the province. There are some fluctuations over time for this localized increases or decreases, but in general they're stable. Wolves and coyotes are a little bit different. We don't have active monitoring of those species. They're very hard. Wolves, in particular, are notoriously very hard to monitor. It's very expensive, and they aren't exactly that widespread over the province. So we don't have active monitoring of those species. But by all accounts, both species seem to be in stable populations right now with no excessive increases.
Now, do you then also keep track of things like the deer population or the elk population as well? Is that something that gets sort of overlaid all of these populations together?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, all our ungulate populations are also monitored. Some have more resources devoted to them in terms of surveying budgets, but no, they all are monitored for sure.
Okay. And are there any major shifts in those populations that have been counted over the last few years?
We have seen some decreases in deer populations just based on some winter events we've had recently. But other populations remain strong in some areas. There are some decreases in forest moose populations that we're investigating. We have some research projects looking at right now. But yes, they're all monitored as we're able.
So if I think back, because of course when we're talking about animals, we have cycles, right? And we have there's a certain time that they're going to have their young, and there's certain times where, there are windows for hunting. There's, all these sorts of things that sort of come into play. And then, but I think back, so maybe the last 5 years, we've had drought in several areas and incredible drought in some areas, forest fires as well. But there's one aspect that has been talked about a bit is the hunting side of things. And during COVID, where potentially there was less hunting that happened and that could potentially impact populations. Are you seeing, or what impacts are you seeing from either drought and fire or from reduced hunting on some of the predator populations?
Certainly climate can impact populations. In particular, though, for predators, we have seen some decrease in hunting post-COVID time. But in general, we haven't seen those making huge impacts in the populations. For species such as wolves, hunting is not a very effective method in population management. They have very low success rates and have very little impact on local populations. So that doesn't appear to be something that's causing any changes in those populations. Our bear hunting has been fairly steady over the years, so that's not. There's a lot of opportunity for bear hunting in this province, and it doesn't seem to be impacting populations in that way. Coyotes as well. We have very liberal seasons on coyotes. It's year-round access to coyotes in the south. So if anything, the market price of pelts for coyotes, it may be impacting the harvest numbers versus any other source of impact.
Mm-hmm. Now, okay, so that covers most of what I sort of wanted to get a sense of on the predation side. I'll throw one more question in, and you can ignore it if you want. Sure. Wild hogs or feral pigs, whatever you want to call them, wild pigs, is that something that your department would be monitoring, or is that completely separate from what you do?
No, Ministry of Environment doesn't actively monitor wild boar populations, but there is contact information. I don't have it just off the top of my head, but there is a access portal you can online that you can report wild boar sightings.
Great. Yeah.
But yeah, we don't actively monitor them.
Okay. Just curious. It's definitely a hot topic in some areas. All right. So now I guess my one question would be for, let's say, those in the province who are concerned potentially about, say, wolves. As you mentioned, wolves are one of those ones that, might be harder to track or get good data on. Is there anywhere that people can go online or those sorts of things and reach out about potential either sightings or issues they might be having with bears or wolves or coyotes?
Yeah, certainly. Like if folks are having issues with predators in general, or have some questions about them, they can certainly call the inquiry line. Okay. And get information through there. They could call the Turn-In Poachers and Polluters line for information if you have aggressive animals. That number is 1-800-667-7561. But yeah, just in general, we have for landowners that are experiencing issues, we do have provisions in the wildlife regulations that allow landowners to kill predators such as wolves, bears, and coyotes to protect their land or property, and that includes livestock without a license. So that is an option should a landowner choose to use that.
Okay. All right. Travis, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
No problem. You have a good day.
So now we jump. So we've talked about sort of the wildlife numbers and the dynamics of those. We are going to take a quick break, and I'm going to be joined then after the break with Dale Knouse. He's with SCIC. So this is essentially crop insurance and the insurance programs for Saskatchewan producers. And we're going to talk about what happens when predation happens and how producers can access coverage for the livestock lost. Let's take a quick break, and I'll be right back right after this.
I get to spend every day talking to farmers in the ag industry through RealAgriculture.com and RealAg Radio. But nothing is more fun than speaking to an audience live and in person. If you're planning an ag event, book a Real Agriculture speaker to make it a successful and memorable experience.
Email shaney@realagriculture.com and you can book myself or any other Real Ag personality to speak at your event. Bring your audience all the fun, insight, and energy of Real Agriculture.
It's summertime, and you've got a lot of important decisions to make when it comes to your corn crop. Let the Corn School on RealAgriculture.com help guide you through those big decisions with input from leading experts in the field. If it's spray timing, disease identification, or any other field issue, the Corn School's got you covered. The Corn School on RealAgriculture.com. Brought to you by BASF and Pride Seeds.
Welcome back to Real Ag Radio here on this July 16th. It is a Tuesday. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. And the answer to your above-ground nitrogen loss problem is Anval Nitrogen Stabilizer from Koch Agronomic Services. To learn how Anval's dual active ingredients deliver extended protection, visit kochag.ca. That's KOCHAG.ca. Joining me now is Dale Knouse. He's Manager of Strategic Operation and Process Improvement with SCIC. Today, Dale, we're going to talk about the predation program in Saskatchewan. Welcome here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so let's walk through. Let's sort of start at the beginning. What is the predation program for producers in Saskatchewan? How does it work?
Well, this program is one of the programs under our wildlife compensation program. It provides 100% compensation for injury or death to eligible livestock, fowl, or specialty animals by predators. There's a coverage for if an animal's injured and needs to be, attended to by a veterinarian. We provide some compensation there. We're up to 80% of the animal's value of those costs. It's eligible on predators such as coyotes, bears, cougars, wolves, bobcat, even birds of prey, scavenging birds, or any other animal that causes injury or death to eligible livestock.
Now, what livestock then are covered?
The majority of the claims that we see are definitely on cattle, calves, lambs, sheep. Those are the primary animals that we get claims for.
So now every province sort of does this differently, and so the programs all have sort of unique characteristics of each of them. And you did mention, full coverage of the loss of an animal or a percent of the cost to potentially bring something back to health. How is that price that a producer would receive for a lost animal, how is that calculated?
Well, looking at, say, specifically for beef calves, we actually look at market value for that. So we determine that price by using market sales data the week before, the week of, and the week after the loss. And then the producer will be compensated for the highest of these three values. If the market price ends up being lower than our set minimum, the producer will receive a minimum amount that we have set.
Okay. Now, as a producer, especially one that maybe has not been through this process before, how does a producer, what does it look like? Is there someone that would come to the farm or ranch and do an evaluation? What does that process look like if I have a kill on my farm?
For sure. So these are considered claims, and our customer service offices administer those. If a producer, finds they've lost an animal to predation, they would contact one of our customer service offices and register a claim. An adjuster is assigned to the claim, and then they will visit the farm as soon as possible. Usually we can get there in a very quick turnaround, and we'll assess the loss.
Okay. Now, so that's the process. What should a producer or farmer do in the meantime? Like, should they take their own photos? Should they try and keep animals away from the site? Are there any sort of good tips for farmers and ranchers while they're waiting?
Yeah, for sure. What the best thing for the producer to do right off the bat is to take some of photos on their cell phone, and also protect the site where the animal was lost, so that the adjuster can access that and do their work to assess that at that time.
Mm-hmm. Now, trend-wise, and this is one of the fun things about stats, is that the numbers are numbers, but they don't always tell you everything. But can you, from the trend of this program, are you able to deduce if predation has been on the rise or decline, or is that tough to do just based on awareness of the program?
Yeah, that is a tough thing for us to do. With wildlife, we do notice, with wildlife losses, we do note that things kind of ebb and flow. There's a lot of variables that probably go into that. And I would say weather is a primary one. When we have periods of time where the weather is, more winter and winter-like and we get wet or storms like that kind of a condition, losses definitely do rise. And so, if a particular period of time we don't have those kinds of periods, and definitely we don't have as many losses. We have noted that, there are a number of people over time that have kind of mentioned they haven't heard of the program, and I do think the awareness of our program is increasing. So it's really tough to attribute, any sort of trend, to one particular thing.
Yeah. Now, you did mention just before we hopped on the air, there has been just recently a change in, and this is actually something unique that I didn't realize, was that there is some money available for buying a livestock guardian. What is that change that has been announced? How does that work for producers?
Yeah, for sure. So that's our livestock guardian dog program. So there is a benefit that people can apply for if they purchase a livestock guardian dog. And that amount was increased recently to $400 from $100. And that is also a retroactive increase from anyone that has, received the $100 payment already since April 1st, that they will be receiving another payment of $300 to cover that difference. But that program is specifically for people to, access a guardian dog, which is an excellent prevention measure that mostly the sheep and goat producers likely use, but anybody that purchases a dog has access to that refund.
Mm-hmm. Now, and finally, are there any limits to this program, or is there sort of after a certain amount of claims, something else, you might have to do some sort of action item? How does that work? Yeah, so we do monitor the number of claims that a particular producer has, or even if they've noted that they've seen an increase in predator activity. So when those types of things arise, we'll definitely hire a predation specialist to assess the situation and then take steps to address the problem. And that definitely is a consultative process. It involves the producer, and in more severe situations, we'll engage with Sask Environment on those. And prevention measures are another great way, like I said, to use throughout this process. So again, we'll consult with the producer on that to ensure that they're effective. And there's a number of things that producers can do to engage in preventive measures, such as, make sure their fencing is adequate for the livestock or fowl that they're trying to, keep in, patrolling fences regularly, making sure you're keeping records of, livestock or fowl on a daily basis, and then do things like protect your birthing area to make sure that it's not exposed, or that it may not, or if it's adjacent to a prime wildlife habitat, that should be something to look for. And definitely, if there's an opportunity, if producers want to purchase a guardian dog, they can apply for the $400 coverage. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And so finally, as you mentioned, so if a producer has a loss or suspects a loss, they get in touch with one of the SCIC consultants or adjusters. Is there a 1-800 number or website that we can give that makes that easy for people to access?
Yes, it is. So they can call our toll-free line at 1-888-935-0000, or they can email us at customer.service@scic.ca, or you can visit your local SCIC office in person to report that damage.
All right. Dale, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you.
All right, we hop now to a quick break, our last of the show, if you can believe it, and we're going to head to the news. I have a lot to cover, so stick around. I'll be right back right after this.
Canola is more than just a pretty face in the prairie landscape. It's a big business, both here and around the world, that requires you to be informed and up to date on everything it takes to grow a successful crop. The Canola School on RealAgriculture.com has an expert library of video resources covering markets, agronomy, and more to help you grow a healthy and profitable canola crop. Visit canolaschool.com today. Brought to you by BASF Canada and Invigor Hybrid Canola.
Infuse some energy into your next corporate event, customer meeting, or conference with RealAg Radio, Canada's national agriculture radio show. Create a unique experience at your next event with host Sean Haney, broadcasting RealAg Radio live on SiriusXM, featuring exciting guests, captivating interviews, and the latest news from the agriculture community. Contact advertising at realagriculture.com or call 587-787-1795 to book your on location with RealAg Radio today. Welcome back to RealAg Radio here on this Tuesday, July 16th. I am your host, Lyndsey Smith, and this segment is brought to you by Chatsworth Farm. Join Chatsworth Farm in the county of Vermilion River on Saturday, August 17th for their 5th annual Alberta Open Farm Days. Take in the artisan market, live music, cooking demos, a barbecue, and farm tours. It's a free event you won't want to miss. Learn more by visiting chatsworthfarm.ca. All right, as promised, we've got today's news, several things to cover. All right, so very quickly, yes, yesterday you heard about the news of MNP buying 6 agronomy-based businesses across Western Canada. This is definitely big news, and we've had quite a bit of feedback and uptick on this story, so go check that out. That's at realagriculture.com. All the details are there. I'm going to guess we're going to be discussing this tactic on tomorrow's issues panel. Yes, that's right. You heard it here first, folks. Friday is a sponsored show, and so we have moved the issues panel to tomorrow. I am hosting tomorrow, and so we've got a little surprise midweek for the issues panel, so we'll be talking about that. An update from the Cargill plant in Regina. That we got news this morning, just a little update for everybody, that the Cargill Regina canola processing facility has hit the halfway mark in its build. And so this is definitely, one of those questions of all of the crush plants that were announced for Western Canada. There was a flurry of them for a little while there. How many are actually going to get built? How many will get shelved? How many will actually open? Will they change their capacity in the planning? So Cargill is one that has stuck by. This is their facility located in the Global Transportation Hub in West Regina in Saskatchewan. And they broke ground July of 2022, so 2 years ago, and the anticipated opening is 2025, and they did send out that announcement this morning that they have reached the halfway mark. All right, if you are in Ontario and you are interested potentially in accessing the OFCAF, so this is the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. This is a fund that covers projects that include rotational grazing, cover cropping, and nitrogen management on new acres or a new project. This is very important. If this is a practice you've already done on a particular piece of land, it's not eligible. But for any new land or new projects, you may be eligible. So the OFCAF funding window is now open for another intake. It is OSCIA that administers that here in the province. So if you're Ontario and you're interested in any OFCAF funding, you can apply to that and see what you get. Lots of farmers, of course, have enjoyed it. I put in for a grazing setup to graze cover crops and was successful. So if you've got an idea, if you've got a project, put it in. Maybe you can get some funding. We also, sticking with Ontario, we also saw yesterday 44 research and innovation projects that officially received funding through the Ontario Agri-Food Innovation Alliance. Now, this is a collab between the province of Ontario, the University of Guelph, and AREO, which is Agriculture Research and Innovation Ontario. This will be $7.2 million split up between these 44 research and innovation projects. And so I went through the list to get an idea of what kind of projects are being funded. And the press release that came out highlighted a few, but I went through the list to see maybe some more interesting ones for our audience. Certainly there's a project that will look at fertilizer management for winter wheat. There's also a development of an avian flu vaccine and an evaluation for that, some micronutrient tissue testing of soybean, and working on genomic, if I could speak today, a genomic marker for African swine fever in hogs, and, which I always think is cool, developing a harvesting robot for greenhouse tomatoes. So that's just a smattering of the 44 different research projects that have been funded. If you head over to RealAgriculture.com, scroll down, you can find the full story, and it does have a link to all 44, a description of all 44 projects that have been funded. And there is a new intake in 2024. Jumping back west, we also did hear from Alberta Grains, who have formally announced that they have injected some inaugural funding into the Western Crop Innovations. So this is the former Field Crop Development Center that was housed at Olds College for a couple years, since 2019. Now, under a new iteration, is becoming the Western Crop Innovations. And it did have a base funding from the Alberta government to essentially get rolling. And now Alberta Grains has said that it is committing $375,000 to support WCI through the balance of the fiscal year, which will get them down to or through to March 31st of 2025. And so Western Crop Innovations is a not-for-profit. It's going to continue work, of course, on cereals for the province of Alberta. So the Field Crop Development Center was well known for its barley and triticale program. Also, I'm sure we're going to see some wheat, some barley, some rye, all sorts of great things at a WCI. So yes, so Alberta Grains kicking in some cash there to see the organization through to March. They are exploring more long-term funding models for WCI, the Western Crop Innovations. All right, there are a few other pieces of news floating around, but I think we'll leave it there for now. There's a few stories we're working on that hopefully we'll have news on for tomorrow, as promised, for the issues panel. So there's some cool stuff going on there. And yes, as I mentioned, it is AIM this week, Ag in Motion. So if you are there, if you happen to run in to Bern Tobin or Amber Bell or Sean Haney, of course, tell them hello, get a selfie, throw it up on social media, if you will. But also, don't forget, head on over to RealAgriculture.com. You can do it from your device, you can do it from your laptop, whatever you want to do. Head on over there, and we're going to have up our new poll. The one that's up right now is on what you do in a bear market, and you can vote on that one, and then shortly after we'll have a new one up. But the what to do in a bear market so far, I'm very proud of all of you. So the options are, how you manage through. Do you cut back on inputs? Do you look for fertilizer savings? Do you put your head in the sand and not look till you absolutely have to sell for cash flow? But the option that is getting the most votes, which everyone gets a gold star, is essentially keeping track of those markets a little more closely and selling into any opportunities, any small rallies that may happen. And you know what? I'm not saying in a poll that there's a right or wrong answer, but that to me sounds like a pretty good one. So there you go. All right. Thank you so much for listening today. Again, I am your host, Lyndsey Smith. If you want to reach out, lsmith@realagriculture.com. You can find me across social media or, of course, the entire Real Agriculture team. We're all over the place. And if you like phones, 855-776-6147. Leave us a message there, and we'll get back to you if need be. All right, as promised, tomorrow I am hosting Issues panel tomorrow. We're also going to look at the hog markets because it is Wednesday. We need a little market something. And yes, so just keep that in mind. Don't miss it, and have a wonderful Tuesday.